There's a lot of pens for you. And there's absolutely nothing here.
I don't know if we should connect to this thing.
Yeah, I think I'll put it on my laptop and we can run it with my laptop. You got no audio. You don't need audio, hey? I'm on the mic. Okay. So it's this here. Yeah. Do you have? Do you need audio? Do I plug in here?
If you can just give me a USB and then we plug it at the back there and I'll give you a clicker.
I don't have all, I've got my own clicker. I'd rather use my own clicker, but I don't have all the presentations yet. I only have the first one of the three speakers in mine.
Is it?
Yeah.
Let's rather do it at the back. The transition is a whole lot smoother.
Okay. Now let me just show you which are the ones you must download. What's your one called, Gershon?
Have you put it on your thingy yet? No.
It's on here, right?
Oh, mine is just GMICA and then an NCPC conference. So
What the hell happened? What the hell has happened here? That button is, why the button stuck?
Let's just go to the back there
Yeah.
and load it so you can actually check it on the
in your
actual
machine.
machine.
So, Al, for this room, all the presentations are loaded in the tech
Yeah.
room.
Yeah.
And I'm actually going to ask Inga. Inga's your room support. Inga and Jabula are your room support if you need anything. So
go.
you don't have to run around.
Okay, take this with you.
No, you can't take this with you.
Is it?
I
You
got
won't
some
need it
notes
then?
in here. My introduction to the speakers are on
Oh,
here.
remember you wanted to check something here, but
Yeah, okay, I'll take it. Oh, just,
Okay. This also comes there. You said you also.
Oh,
you're
okay.
talking
And
about-
also, they're going to show you guys how to manage the remotes. Because the slide changes name and all.
kind of a plug. Let me see. We have this one, right? So connect to the Wi-Fi there. Another one there. Connect.
Yes, I'm on the EFF, presentation on national whisper.
Are you also in that session?
I'm in the first session of the circular economy.
Energy efficiency. So you get sorted, but let me get you your power supply, and then you should be good to go. Thank you, sir. Yeah, I need power supply.
Oh, it's going to be in Ruby, eh?
Yes.
Where's
So
Ruby?
out that door, straight across.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I'll sort you out. Okay. So you get it ready here, and then
So are we good to go?
just one moment. Just one
What are you doing now?
We just need to get his charger to work, and then we should be good.
Do you want to spare charge? Have we got some charge?
What's wrong with the charger at the moment?
Everything is okay.
You need a certain plug point?
Alright, let me just change something here.
If CISA doesn't show,
Yeah, we're a bit late, and CISA hasn't shown, so we'll work around.
That's fine.
Oh, you got
Good to
the
go.
clicker.
Yeah.
All right, yeah.
So you're putting me up now?
Yeah,
My
I'm gonna
presentation.
I'm gonna put yours up. I just need him to.
Sorry. Looks like CISA is not in the account. So what we're going to do, we're
Even
going
him
to
and then.
straight to Gershwin and then come on. And since he does arrive,
Yes, that's right. Just if it does arrive, just ask him to start by me. They load it. If he has it on his stick, or fine. If he has this, his laptop, then introduce it on the thing and try and get to it.
there's no way you can turn the lights down. Oh, must it be his lights on?
Yeah, because the guy said us that there are two.
It's slightly too hot, but okay. But that's
So I'm gonna get there, take out the music, and then start out with this.
the minute I see my presentation. Right, good morning everyone. Let's try that again. Good morning everyone. Wonderful. I apologize that we are late. We are waiting for a speaker to arrive and we're just sorting out the technical issues around getting 4 presentations loaded, and we'll start in a few minutes. So please bear with me. It will be another minute or so and then we can get going. All right, this first session on day 2 of the Industrial Efficiency Conference will focus on the energy efficiency track. We'll focus on quite a broad range of speaking topics, sketching the landscape and then digging into more and greater detail in terms of activities in energy efficiency not only in South Africa but on the African continent. I will lead into that with just a very short presentation of the Industrial Energy Efficiency Project, a project that was launched in 2010, and it's really difficult to condense the highlights of a 8-9 year project into 15 minutes. So I had to really look at what were strikingly and profound in driving paradigm shifts, not only in South Africa but more broadly beyond our borders, and collated the following slides that I think speak to what the project did and how it did what it did over that period. The IEE project, the implementing agent for the IEE project was the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. And the family of countries that have implemented the IEE project or elements of the IEE project have grown, when you consider both ongoing projects and planned activities, have grown to 30 countries. What is remarkable, and I think certainly noteworthy, is that South Africa started all of that. In many ways, South Africa still remains the one country where the project in all its services and full bouquet of services was launched and still is currently operating. So clearly, the work done by UNIDO stems from a lot of the early and good work done in South Africa. And to capture both the objective of the initial phase of the project and subsequently the second phase that we're in today, it was essentially to create that enabling environment in South Africa across all industrial sectors. Initially, we had targeted 5, what we considered to be energy-intensive sectors, but very soon we realized that that just wasn't going to work, that we needed to extend the scope more broadly by mainstreaming energy management systems and energy systems optimization, as well as the standard, the energy management standard, ISO 50001, ultimately to realize increased investment in energy efficiency. And that has become a bigger focus in the second phase of the project, is having achieved what we did in the initial phase and having implemented and worked with organizations implementing, how do we then accelerate that by making sure that we can unlock funding from financial institutions, banks, South African banks, international financial institutions, to increase the investment in energy efficiency projects. And one of the things that we always saw as a very big argument in the work that the project did was equating the work of, or the achievements in energy efficiency as a first fuel. compared to a lot of the other fuels, and looking at diverting enormous resources into building more power plants by making sure we are successful in reducing energy efficiency. Challenges abounded in the early days, and broadly categorized, we encountered challenges across three broad categories, which was people, information, and technology. And these have become less common, but they are still there in industry today. So with people, there was a lack of leadership within organizations, and the barrier was, or the thinking at the time was, that we were already the best. And I can remember in the early days at a petrochemical refinery in the Western Cape, where the principal engineer said to us, they don't need these services because they are the best. And when I quoted him some of the work we had done at Toyota and ArcelorMittal, he said, yeah, but they've always been way behind petrochemical refineries anyway. And when I asked him when last he did an energy audit, he couldn't remember. So it was an attitude that they're already the best. Then we found with information, everybody believed that they already knew it or they had it. And in terms of technology, they never had money. And the ability to develop proof of concept became a big issue for many organizations. So those were some of the early challenges. What essentially became the source code for the IEE project was captured on this slide. And fundamental to all the work we did was a very simple message, and that was in the center of that slide that says, we want to drive down kilowatt hours. Oh yeah, well, CO2e is equally important, KVA is important, but kilowatt hours are measurable. Kilowatt hours tick as every minute ticks by in a business. And when the focus becomes very strongly on driving down kilowatt hours, then the other good things follow. So around that, it was to drive the plan, do, check, act methodology of gaining commitment from management to implement, and then planning the changes and implementing those changes, and then checking whether you achieved what you expected to or planned to achieve. So that became, as I said, the source code for the work we did. And the other important element that the project based a lot of its work on, and its approach was the systems approach. Where at the time in 2010, South Africa was awash with a lot of good vendor salesmen that sold pumps and compressors and fans without any due consideration for what happened before or after that. And what the project did was to draw the envelope more broadly around the process as well. And instead of starting to optimize systems by going to the pump or the compressor in a plant, we walked into the plant and looked at the process, and we observed the process, and we looked at how they used the energy. And we determined what the peak demands were and what the demand profile was. And once we understood the process, we would then look at distribution, we would then look at generation, and we would optimize. And in this case, as the example of a pumping system, we would then look at whether the motor is sized properly, whether the controls of that motor needs the demand of the process, and essentially effect changes there and go further back. But ultimately, what we sought to do was to match the demands and the needs of the process with the ability of the energy system to supply that. In terms of, I think, the critical difference the project introduced was our vocational training and the way we did it. Because one of the early discoveries, and that was replicated in all the other 30 countries too, is that there was a gap, there was a skills gap between graduate engineers who knew all the fundamentals and understood why things worked, they worked, and plant technicians and process engineers who worked in the plant, who fixed up and repaired and were doing troubleshooting all day long, who knew how to fix it up but didn't know why it worked that way or why that corrected the situation. So the project came in and merged those two, where we started to provide vocational training to process and plant engineers and plant technicians and operators through a series of training formats, from a half day to an expert program where we went on site. And that started with national experts. Initially, those were international experts, where we would gather a group of these process and plant engineers and operators into a host plant and teach them in the host plant how to optimize a system. And beyond that, split them out individually in each of their own candidate plants to replicate the work they did in the host plant, but under the supervision of the trainers. And that model worked exceedingly well. And we have produced, I think, in excess of about 200 experts in different fields of different energy systems. And that has worked and started to capacitate South African engineers and plant personnel and utility managers and maintenance engineers to fulfill the work that previously had been outsourced to companies that probably knew less than they did anyway. The one thing that struck us about midway into the original phase was the absolute importance of the operator, the engineer, the person, the human being in this very technical field that we're in. And behavior change became the clarion cry, and behavior change sustained a lot of these successes. And without the buy-in and commitment and support from that man in the blue dungaree there, which represents a plant operator and a plant technician, we would not have succeeded. And we found that success was premised very strongly on the commitment and buy-in of that. And what really heartened us in the project was to see how companies took that upon themselves and customized it to suit their own needs. In the top right, that was an ArcelorMittal one in the top right, where they sought commitment in a way that aligned very well with a study at the time being undertaken by the German Development Institute on behavioral economics, where they had their employees come and place palm prints on colored sheets, and they posted those across the plant with a commitment. We have at the bottom just a quote from one of our managers that underscores the importance of behavior change. And the SOS switch-off and SWAT carton was something that Ackermans introduced in their operations. And they started to just have a simple campaign with a little green sticker that switch off something below every light switch and below every machine. And they had a cartoon that they published where the message was essentially how to conserve energy. The bottom one was from a plastics company in Johannesburg that believed they cannot start an implementation of an energy management system unless they had the implicit trust of their workers, unless they had a relationship between management and workers that made this work. So all of a sudden, this very technical thing about energy management and energy efficiency was premised on a very strong human element, and human behavior was very critical to our success. Monitoring energy performance is important, and I think we encountered some of the early problems that UNIDO encountered elsewhere in the world as well, is that the way energy is reported was essentially flawed, and that a lot of the metrics used by companies reporting energy, especially specific energy consumption ratios, were meaningless. So we introduced, with the support of UNIDO and ISO, of the ISO 50006 energy management standard on baselines and energy performance indicators, we introduced another 2-day training course to teach those managers that report into national company or corporate company or individual plant management how to report energy performance properly. And that has become, and it's become one of our more evolving courses of training, where we are finding that the challenge to break down the barriers that exist is quite large. So despite all of that, we still have companies that believe that they're too busy to do the right thing. They would, as this cartoon shows, they would continue drawing their cart with the square wheel and not take time out to just reconsider a better way of doing it. What have we achieved in this time? Over the period April 2010 to March 2019, the IEE project in South Africa supported the implementation and the achievement of actual savings amounting to 5.7 terawatt hours. That's 5,700 gigawatt hours. 5.6 million tons of CO2 emissions were mitigated during that period, and the savings amounted to 4.6 billion rand. Now, when we try and share that with people, it's very difficult at times just to comprehend what that means. But placed in more maybe understandable South African language, it's equivalent to the electricity required to power 790,000 middle-income South African homes for 12 months. And the middle-income South African home consumes about 600 kilowatt hours per month, 7,200 kilowatts per year, is 87 square meters, and that's our definition in South Africa of a middle-income home. That's about 18% of all middle-income homes in South Africa. And we often ask ourselves, what would the life have been like in South Africa without the IEE project? But there were other things that happened that we didn't anticipate, and there was other things we learned along the way. And one of them is the phenomenon of what we call unique incremental savings. Because when we start an implementation of an energy management system, or when we start an energy systems optimization project, we establish a baseline. And when we establish that baseline, we are able to reference the work we do and we develop action plans. But then we compare the results at the end of the day against that baseline, and we do a top-down and bottom-up sanity check to make sure that it ties up. And in many or most of the cases, we found that we've actually saved more energy than the action plans that projected we would. And that created a need to study why that was and what accounted for that. And we discovered that against the baseline, the green line is typically the target. We would achieve targets, we would achieve savings defined and determined within our action plans. But beyond that, there was an area of additional savings. And those additional savings is what we call that unique incremental savings. And we had learned, and this is now becoming more and more commonplace, not only in South Africa, that those unique incremental savings arise from a broad awareness, just a commitment, the imbibing of the philosophy, the fact that maybe there are conservative targets that were set initially, but unique incremental savings are something that the International Energy Agency is studying along with other countries and South Africa to determine why that is and what that is and how we can capture that and how we can predict those. Another important one has been the understanding and the awareness of non-energy benefits. So besides achieving those kilowatt-hour savings, how have we changed life in the South African industrial landscape? Have we improved the quality of jobs? Have we improved the quality of product? Have we improved the productivity? So any real or perceived financial or intangible benefit received from an energy efficiency is something that we are now urging businesses to consider. Because when I have two competing CapEx projects on the table to fund, the one that has the greater non-energy benefits is the one that ultimately is going to attract the funding. And that is becoming something that going forward beyond the project is something that we clearly want to gain a better understanding of and want to add greater value to the way we report energy savings. We did not only confine what we were doing within the borders of South Africa, and through the work that the project had done, and largely through leveraging the relationship with the United Nations and the United Nations Environmental Programme, the IEE project extended the activities beyond South Africa into Mozambique, Namibia, Mauritius, Uganda, and Ghana, and continue to do so today, because it's something that you just cannot keep bottled up in the boundaries of South Africa, and there's continentally a need to replicate some of the good things that the project has done. So I hope that with that I've given and instilled some sort of sense of the IEE project and its life over the last 8 years in South Africa. Thank you very much. What we will do now, we will have 3 speakers. 2 of them are with us now to come up and speak, and I'll introduce each of them. We will stay on the podium, and at the end of the last presentation, we'd welcome questions from you. So please, if during the course of the next presentations you have any questions, or even from what I've just said, note those down and let's take them during the period following the last presentation. Okay, our next speaker would be Gershon McCure. Gershon is the UNIDO Energy Management Working Group Coordinator. Gershon was my manager when I joined the project. He was the inaugural national project manager. Gershon currently works with 7 countries and regions who are part of the Clean Energy Ministerial's Energy Management Working Group, and supports the development of resources to provide key information and analysis as well as guidance to help governments, businesses, and industry adopt energy management systems. In the recent past, Gershon managed the Global Cleantech Innovation Program for SMEs in South Africa, a 4-year UNIDO-led project in partnership with the GEF and the Technology Innovation Agency of South Africa. And previously, he led the Industrial Energy Efficiency Project that I just spent 10 to 15 minutes talking to you about. Gershon holds a master's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Cape Town, and he previously served as the chairman of the board of the Measurement and Verification Professional Council of South Africa and on the South African Bureau of Standards Committees on Energy Management, the Working Committee TC242. Also more recently, Gershon served as the interim chair of the board of the establishment of the new ESCOs Association of South Africa. So whilst Gershwin may be sitting in Vienna, at the UNIDO headquarters in Vienna, he is deep down a South African, and I'm proud to say deep down a Cape Townian. So I welcome Gershwin to come up and share with us a presentation on the programmatic opportunities to support industrial decarbonization. Let's give him a hand.
This is counterintuitive, right? Yeah, we were just saying that the pointer, when the arrow is down, you go forward. That's a bit counterintuitive. So good morning, everybody. Alf said, I have 30 minutes to talk. And I said, no ways. I'm not talking for 30 minutes. That's way too long. You don't want to hear my boring voice for 30 minutes. So I'll keep it short. I come now from the perspective of UNIDO, and as Alf has said previously, very much in the South African context, very much working with NCPC and companies that are here, for example, in industrial energy efficiency. But now I've got a different hat, but I'm still very much South African, as you say, Alf. When I thought about this, what should I say here today? I was invited by the NCPC. I thought, you know, everybody speaks about ENMS, energy management systems. Everybody speaks energy efficiency. Everybody might be speaking about systems optimization. And I thought perhaps just let's take a different lens and start looking at some of the other opportunities that are arising. Because as UNIDO, we're also looking at what are the further programmatic opportunities we need to start investing in and building up a sense of capacity around. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about the opportunities for deep decarbonization in industry. So as Alf has shown you, the energy management system and systems optimization program of UNIDO started in South Africa in 2010 and has progressed to 20 countries where it's already implemented and 10 countries where there are plans to implement the same program or parts of the program. The program obviously doesn't run on love and fresh air. There are funders that put money into this, and for the most part it's been the Global Environment Facility. But of course there are others, like the South African government, for example, other governments, and being the Swiss, for example, and the UK government. So we mustn't forget that there's also that aspect that comes to these programs, that UNIDO itself does not fund projects. We find donors to help countries implement these projects. Some of the stats may be out of date, as Alpha's just given us even new stats that we need to incorporate in here. But essentially it says that there's been a massive increase over the years, over the 9 or so years that we've been involved in energy efficiency, energy management systems, where a number of people have been affected, enterprises have been affected and reached out to, and of course that has resulted in a number of, well, quite a large amount of energy savings through the program. Just to give a little bit of perspective on that, I mean, Alf put some big numbers up that we have to now fold into these old numbers that I have, but essentially showing the fact that a huge number of, or a huge amount of energy has been saved, and that translates to, again, beyond 6 million tons of CO2 mitigated. And of course, there's a pipeline of projects that are now being generated because of the interventions that the project is doing in various countries. So, to my current role a little bit, as Alf introduced me, what I do at the moment, I work in an environment now where we're dealing with something called the Clean Energy Ministerial. And in the Clean Energy Ministerial, there are 27 countries who are really committed to a clean energy future. And the work we do with them is we try to I'm specifically on the energy management working group. So we try to work with governments to find pathways, strategies for them to best implement energy management systems as part of their policy mix. So what we found is, and South Africa is part of this mix as well. Our representative Barry is sitting there on the right at the back, or in the middle, he's hiding now. But essentially what we found is that this group of countries is a really big chunk of world energy use, and therefore, of course, has a really big impact on the carbon emissions, the GHG emissions that are emitted globally. So the question is really, how can we, as this group of countries, start working on strategies to decarbonize? What we know is that at the moment, many countries have signed the Paris Agreement, ratified it. People have made commitments to mitigate carbon. And there's this ambition to be net zero carbon by 2050. It's quite ambitious. I remember yesterday Alf was talking quite seriously and controversially maybe in places about how South Africa is going to take the leap forward to get to its target, carbon targets in the next 10 years or whatever. The fact of the matter is energy efficiency has done a lot in mitigating carbon. And the energy efficiency programs we have rolled out have done a lot to mitigate carbon. The difficulty there is energy efficiency in itself only takes us to a specific point, and there are other strategies we may have to employ on top of energy efficiency that will help us along to these carbon targets. What we find, and I know through Alf's work with the cement industry and the steel industry, for example, these are industries that are heavily process-driven. They have challenges in bringing the energy consumption down, in mitigating carbon, and they are industries we call hard-to-abate industries. And so there's a need in these industries to start taking a leap forward and thinking about how do we best address their specific needs in trying to mitigate the carbon from their processes from their processes. So, what we found is we did a little bit of a study, desktop study with a consultancy here in South Africa, by the way, at UNIDO, in order to start categorizing where can we programmatically start intervening, where can countries and companies start thinking about what is it that we need to do beyond energy efficiency or in conjunction with energy efficiency, what are the things we need to do going forward. So when we look at it from a sector-specific space, we can see energy efficiency is not going to go away. It's always going to be the base on which you build any carbon mitigation strategy. So do not think Alf and team will go away. This is going to be the basis for all work that we will do on mitigating carbon. But there are other issues that we need to consider. You know, from a process perspective, do we need to start thinking about electrifying processes more? Do we need to start replacing certain fuels in order to, or switching certain fuels in order to mitigate carbon more aggressively? Do we need to use carbon capture and storage as a means to mitigate carbon? The cross-cutting themes that we see as areas where industry and policymakers can make a difference is, again, looking at areas of industrial heat, renewable electricity, and renewable electricity for industry, which is a topic on its own. It's something in its infancy and really needs to be accelerated. Industry value chains. I mean, I spoke to a gentleman last night, I don't know if he's here, from Excellent Meat. And they're part of the Woolworths value chain. And the point of the matter is, within value chains, within supply chains, there are so many opportunities to mitigate carbon because the OEMs have this power, so to speak, to influence their supply chains. And we're not seeing enough of that, where OEMs can make, build into the supply chain certain standards, for example, that can get compliance and therefore reduce carbon emissions from their supply chain. So this is an area, I think, even in the IE project globally, where we can push this agenda even harder. The other area that comes up regularly is this new area of digitalization. And digitalization can be as simple as, are you monitoring your energy use in order to manage it better? I mean, that's the very basic type of digitalization we could talk of. There are a number of other elements to digitalization which is more sophisticated. But at the moment, we can start as simple as possible by just measuring what we are consuming in order to manage. Yesterday I was here again, and the topic of circular economy is very high on the agenda with NCPC. We see circular economy issues of material efficiency, of better design, eco-friendly design of products and processes as a step forward in decarbonizing industry as well. So all of these elements that has been spoken around the table over the last day and will be spoken about today, all of these elements are part of the strategy to decarbonize industry further and shouldn't be seen, as separate things really to be done separately. They are the strategies that industry need to take on board as appropriate on top of energy efficiency. So from a policy perspective, and we encourage governments especially to look at their regulations, to look at their mandates, to look at roadmaps and standards in order to start affecting this deep decarbonization of industry. We've heard yesterday about carbon tax. We've heard yesterday about 12L incentives that will be continued until 2020, if I remember correctly. These are all elements that we need to start engaging with in order to take the opportunity to decarbonize our industry. I know, Alf, in the IE project, we're hoping to get working on some financing options for industry as well, building business cases that can be investment ready. These are other elements that need to be in place for government and industry to better address the decarbonization effort. And of course, what we're doing here, we're raising awareness, and this can never stop. I think with Alf's point on behavior change, every document, every project document we write, awareness raising. But as you said, Alf, the key there is getting mindsets to change. And this is a study field all on its own. I mean, we're doing some work globally on this, and nobody quite has it, down packed yet. How do we get people to change minds around energy efficiency and decarbonization? So there are a lot of efforts going on. There's a lot of good work done by teams like with what Alf and the team here is doing in getting companies to turn their heads, to change their minds about certain perspectives and certain priorities. We heard yesterday on the carbon tax, even though, there's so many concessions in the carbon tax, at least it's making companies think about what this means to their liability, their tax liability, and therefore what it means to be decarbonizing their processes. So at least there's some kind of nudge, even in a disincentive or a tax, to get people to change their point of view. We, of course, know that there are challenges. We will, as we've been nudging towards certain financial incentives, we know that there are certain barriers to access to finance, and much of it is awareness about what is out there. We know that there could be long lead times when you trying to invest in certain equipment. When we deal with circular economy, it's not only about production processes, it's about consumer behavior as well. So there's a bigger effort needed around consumer awareness around circular economy issues, about sustainability issues, and about purchasing specific types of products. And of course, the one at the bottom, I'm not going to go read all of them, but there's this acceptability of certain technologies that could hamper progress of decarbonization. And we had a specific issue on carbon capture and storage where certain communities were not happy that the facilities are being built in their vicinity. So this is another element that we need to consider, that what we're doing affects communities as well, could affect communities, and therefore the acceptability of these interventions become key to success. So for those, especially the policymakers around the table, but also for industry looking forward, beyond the current good work you're doing in energy efficiency, energy management, systems optimization, start to look at the other areas that I'm going to highlight now as opportunities for future decarbonization, because, as I said, on our current trajectory, even in South Africa, we will not meet our carbon targets. So we need to take a step forward, we need to take a step up, we need to take a step change in the way we address carbon. Developing benchmarking best practice. The interesting thing is we are just about to start some work with Sanedi on this work, and I know the DTI has done a lot of work on benchmarking and best practice for certain industry sectors. So there's a lot of work now happening or about to happen in this space, specifically around benchmarking in sectors and data collection in sectors. This will also lead to work in identifying specific technology types that could be benchmarked in specific sectors. And again, for industry, this becomes important because then you know where to put your money in terms of being able to procure the right kinds of systems in order to decarbonize quicker. As I said earlier, one of the very key areas we can play a strong role is in industrial value chains. Small businesses, there is a proliferation of small businesses in South Africa. The opportunity is untapped in terms of energy savings. So there's a lot of work that is available for the NCPC, for consultants, for energy services companies to help small businesses in industrial value chains to decarbonize or to lower their energy footprint. And then, as I said at the beginning, one of the key drivers of deep decarbonization is the fact that we have certain industries that have a very hard time trying to drive down their CO2 emissions. And so we need to come up with strategies to help those industries, cement, metals, chemicals, to drive down their carbon footprints. And here we talk about things like proper kinds of partnerships that we need to develop between ourselves, industry, academic institutions, facilitate certain pilots within industry. Somebody said to me, oh, well, why are the governments going, industry person said, why should the governments try to find new technology solutions? There are industrial players who already know what the best technologies are. Why don't you just ask them? And they'll tell you what the best technologies are. So there's an exercise we need to go through. Certain cement players will know already what the best way to abate carbon is with certain processes, what the best technologies are. Can we share that information amongst other cement players? So this is again a tactic that NCPC and other implementing agencies can start using, and government itself can start using to drive the deep decarbonization of industry. With that, I thank you, and I trust that I've stimulated some forward thinking beyond energy efficiency, and I thank you and enjoy the rest of the show. Thank you.
Sure, do you want to talk more?
I must talk more? Okay. No, did you say no?
Right, we move on to our next speaker, and well, I think the first two presentations align very well. I think the next one will take us into more of the practical and more of the actual implementation in a very nice way. Our next speaker is Tawanda Collins Muzamwesi, and he's the Chief Sustainability Consultant of Toxiconsol Private Limited and an Executive Director of the Business Council for Sustainable Development in Zimbabwe. He holds an MSc in Environmental and Energy Management from the University of Twente and a BSc Honours in Applied Environmental Science from the University of Zimbabwe. He's done sustainability projects, training, consultancy and studies and audits in 30 countries around the world, and Tawanda coordinated the National Project on Industrial Energy Efficiency and Efficient Water Utilization Project in Zimbabwean industries, supported by the Climate Technology Center and Network CTCN. In addition, he developed the Project for Green Industry initiative in Zimbabwe, including aspects of energy efficiency and renewable energy for productive use. Tawanda is a leading expert in sustainability reporting that promotes GRI frameworks for reporting, and is a certified lead auditor and with the German Association of Certification of Management System Auditors. He's also a certified green industry and certified green technologies expert, and implemented resource efficient and cleaner production projects at the Zimbabwe National Cleaner Production Center. Let's welcome Tawanda to deliver his. I'm going to set that up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and also thank you very much, Gershwin, for your other presentation. I want to make my presentation this morning using the Mentimeter platform, which is a bit different from the usual PowerPoint. The reason being that I need to interact with you during this presentation, and we are going to make this presentation together. So if you want to join my presentation, you have to log on to a website, www.menti.com, www.menti.com. And once you arrive there, they will request for you to to type a code. So whether you've got a tablet, whether you've got a laptop or a phone, you can join my presentation on www.menti.com. And the particular code for this presentation is 420140. 420140. I will go again for the last time, www.menti.com. Once you are there, you type a code 420140. Now, I see a couple of you liking my presentation, showing that you are now in my presentation, and that's very good. We can be able to move together. Basically, this morning I'm going to talk about the opportunities and challenges for industrial energy efficiency in small to medium-sized enterprises, with a specific reference on a program that we carried out in Zimbabwe, also feeding onto the foundation that Alf and Gershwin has already given. I can say that 29 is the highest number of likes that I've had before making a presentation. And so thank you very much for your overwhelming support. I will not waste time in terms of introducing myself because the facilitator has already done that sort of introduction, but it is good to have such forums where we can share ideas. I want to start my presentation by, first of all, underlining the importance of energy in the socio-economic development of any country. And I want to quote the Director General of the United Nations Industrial Organization, Mr. Lee Yong, who said that there is no country in this world which achieved the highest level of socio-economic development without growing its industrial sector. And energy is central to industrial development. Energy is central in meeting other goals. So what we then see is that the efficient utilization of energy is very important if companies are going to compete, if products are going to go into international markets. I want to remind you that you can ask me a question anytime during this presentation, and I can check your questions as we go in the bottom right of this presentation. So you can ask, a question as we go. That is a picture of Africa, during the night, as far as energy access is concerned. The other parts of Africa still remain with poor energy access, apart from South Africa, which looks brighter, and of course the northern parts of Africa. Why am I doing this? I want to emphasize the importance of energy. 2015, the Sustainable Development Goals, and goal number 7 looks at clean and affordable energy. Again, when we unpack that goal, there are specific targets that relate to the efficient utilization of energy. So, in order for developing countries to leapfrog, we are talking about leapfrogging. In order for the African economies to leapfrog the developed economies, energy access will be important, as well as efficient utilization of energy. Ladies and gentlemen, at the center of all the Sustainable Development Goals is energy. If you want to provide access to water, you need energy to pump that water. But the question of how efficient that process is also very, very critical. Another goal that is to do with sustainable consumption and production is correlated with respect to energy, industry, and innovation as well. So we are talking about SMEs, which constitute a very significant portion of the economies of Africa. When we talk of issues of energy efficiency, we cannot leave SMEs in that sort of discussion. The SMEs' first financial challenge is to invest in energy efficiency, and some, if actually not most of them, are actually characterized by obsolete equipment, archaic technologies. If you go into some of the SME operations, some of their equipment, it reminds you like you've gone into a museum. So, ladies and gentlemen, what we are saying today is that when we talk of industrial energy efficiency, SMEs are also at the core. Now, I would want us to understand some of the factors which affect SMEs in terms of adopting industrial energy efficiency. These factors, they do vary from country to country. The factors which affect South Africa are different from the factors which affect Zimbabwe, different from the factors which affect Botswana. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would want us to vote and understand some of the important motivating and driving factors for industrial energy efficiency in your country based on the group that is here. There are many factors which can influence the adoption of industrial energy efficiency, and we need to understand those particular factors. So as your votes continue to come through, I see that the majority of you are actually inspired by cost savings on the road to implement industrial energy efficiency. When we start talking about the bottom line, how we can actually affect the bottom line, how do we impact the bottom line, the CEO or the most senior guy becomes very interested. I see that also quite a significant portion of you believe that the need to address climate change and to reduce emission is also a driver and one of the factors that lead to cognitions towards industrial energy efficiency. Again, I will circulate such results to the organizers of this conference, so that we see what was coming out of this particular group. If we go to Egypt or to Morocco, we may actually find a different context. So the drivers of energy efficiency, they may be common in as much as they've already been grouped by ALF into three broad categories. But when you zero in on a particular country, you will see that any one of those three broad categories could be dominant, depending on the country-specific situation. So my association, the Business Council for Sustainable Development Zimbabwe, which has got 100 companies from the private sector, mining, service industries, and a global networking partner of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland, the biggest grouping of private sector companies in the world. We sought for technical assistance through the CTCN, that's the Climate Technology Center and Network, which is basically a consortium of UNIDO and UN Environment, working in collaboration with different development partners to implement a project on industrial energy efficiency and efficient water utilization in selected Zimbabwean companies. So the project resulted in training of about 46 experts in energy auditing and industrial energy efficiency, also including renewable energy. It's very difficult to separate issues of energy efficiency and issues of renewable energy. Then we also carried out energy audits in 10 high-impact companies, as well as training in energy management systems based on ISO 50001 2018, and I think in the mid-morning session there's going to be also specific focus on ISO 50001. Then the development of a national energy efficiency and water manual that companies can use, and also identification of renewable energy potential in different companies. We had quite a comprehensive selection criteria. We had the following sectors: food processing, leather and footwear, agrochemicals, timber mining, cement production, cable manufacturing, building and construction, waste management, and also the dairy sector. In order to achieve the highest impact in energy efficiency, we also need to identify the organizations with a high energy consumption so that we can also achieve higher results. We are not saying that we don't take those ones without. So one of our criteria when we were selecting companies, we adopted a funnel approach. Was, okay, how much are these organizations consuming? And if we're going to implement measures, what will be the impact? What could be done, using good housekeeping with, low-hanging fruits? And also, we used plant vintage as a selection criteria. I don't know what happened to my machine, but I'll be able to continue as they sort this out. If they don't sort it out, we'll still be able to continue. Technology cannot be a limitation to our engagement. So one of the things which we also looked at was plant vintage. How old was the plant? So we preferred organizations which were a bit older, which meant that their processes were less efficient, their equipment was less efficient. Those are the organizations that we also selected. We also selected organizations which were dotted in different parts of the country. Then we got support from UNIDO and UNEP and CTCN through the PricewaterhouseCoopers, India. They were the ones who responded to this particular project, and they offered support in various industries. And it was very interesting to see that they were very, very interesting initiatives which could be achieved as far as compressed air is concerned. So there were savings with respect to compressed air systems. In most companies which were tested, you'll see that the efficiency of their compressed air systems was very, very low, maybe around 40% or 30%, through leakages. And some of these leakages could actually be prevented by your general maintenance on a day-to-day basis. You also see that we carried out work to do with the behavior. Sometimes when you are doing energy audits, you could see that some employees were cleaning themselves using compressed air. Cleaning themselves using compressed air. So such behaviors are behaviors which we do not want to see. They are behaviors which also, waste energy. I'm not going to talk about the issue of water, which we're also focusing on. You see employees leaving hoses running throughout the night. And such behaviors need to come to an end. There were also initiatives related to refrigeration. There were also quite a number of massive savings in refrigeration. There were also quite a number of savings when it came to insulation, because one of our case studies was an organization that is involved in cable manufacturing. So they also have got a furnace where they melt the copper. And what we saw was that issues of insulation could actually help us to reduce energy consumption and also energy intensity. It's very unfortunate that in Zimbabwe there is one company that is implementing a formal energy management system. So South Africa is a country that we look up to for inspiration, we look up to for encouragement. So it was very, very unfortunate. So through this program, we have now seen these case studies now more interested in implementing an energy management system, and the latest being the ISO 50001 of 2018. So the challenge that we found out in those SMEs was that the lack of implementation of energy management systems makes it difficult for energy efficiency improvements to be systematic. It means that the energy savings or the initiatives will just be implemented on an ad hoc basis. And also what we found out was the organizations, in terms of savings, because we had 10 case studies, and now we are moving on to phase 2, where we are engaging various development partners to support the issues of upscaling, to support the issues of replication of these projects. So the 10 organizations combined can actually achieve savings of $3 million United States dollars per annum, which is very, very good. I've seen that when Rapulu, the director, was speaking yesterday, he mentioned that, you know, these savings could actually be achieved. So United States dollars of about 3 million on an annual basis. And what we also found out was that most of the identified options, I think there were 161 energy-saving measures which were identified across the 10 companies. And you will see that most of these measures could be achieved in a period of within 3 years. Some of them, like the one I was talking about, where workers will be cleaning themselves using compressed air in a dusty factory, these do not actually need, you know, they can actually be achieved now. You don't need a long period of time to achieve those particular measures. So when we talk of energy efficiency, it's not only the technical measures, but also there are housekeeping issues. There are also soft issues that we have to look at. There are soft issues that we have to address. And this is what this program was achieving. And we made a point in this program that before any organization gets into the project, it would need to make sure that there is a letter from the chief executive officer or the managing director or the most senior employee of that particular organization. And we found that working. Now, the reason why many energy efficiency programs do not work on the continent is because top management is not involved. In order to implement, replicate, upscale energy efficiency, it's very important that top management is involved. It's very important that top management also takes ownership of that particular project. And we found it very, very interesting in our project. And what we are now doing is to move and make sure that we are now touching other companies. Now, one of the things that we also found out is the need for benchmarking. You can think that you are leading, whereas you are actually following. It's very important that as South Africa, you must benchmark with the best in the world. There is no need for South Africa to celebrate leading African countries. There is no need for Zimbabwe to celebrate leading African countries, or Zambia for that matter, as far as issues to do with energy efficiency are concerned. You need to make sure that you benchmark with the best in the world. And benchmarking in terms of energy efficiency is a process whereby you also compare the energy performance of other international organizations. And I'm very glad that Alf was talking about the indicators earlier on in his presentation, to say that they developed indicators because there was a lot of confusion in terms of the analysis. So I'm very glad for the work that you did on the indicators. And I think in Zimbabwe, it's something that we are also trying to do in order to ensure comparability of the project. So I'm very sorry about the network connectivity here, which may not have been sharp, but I will just catch up with where I was. If you can type www.menti.com, because I'm now reaching the last parts of my presentation, and the code is still 420140. But maybe you may need to join the presentation again because we lost connection on this computer. But we can connect from anywhere in the world using any machine with this type of technology. And we have quickly transitioned now into Alf's computer, and you are also already liking it. So now, those are some of the pictures from the ground when we're doing energy audits. Energy audits require a hands-on approach. We do not want organizations which do energy audits from the cell phone, okay, or using remote control. You have to be involved. You have to go into the trenches. We see a team on the far right doing, emission assessment, boiler emission assessment, as we now try to analyze some of the heat losses that are coming from the boilers. I've already mentioned these things without the aid of my laptop, and remember that I said 161 options were identified, and we are now in the process of making sure that they are being implemented. We also saw that 78%, I already mentioned that, have got less than 3 years payback period. And again, remember I mentioned something around 3 million, but it's actually 3.85 million. It's very important to internalize presentations, because when some of these glitches happen, you may look foreign to your own presentation. But I'm glad that there's that synchrony, between what I was talking about and the moment when we caught up with our presentation. But remember that the issue of reducing emissions, we saw one company being able of reducing about 11,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, which is quite massive, through this energy efficiency project. And I understand that South Africa also has got what we call nationally determined contributions, which are targets under the Paris Agreement. Now, one of the easiest ways of achieving our Paris targets is through energy efficiency and also renewable energy, which Alf already alluded to, and also Gershwin. Right, so Zimbabwe's target is 33%, which is quite ambitious, but with energy efficiency that will work. I'm not going to spend time going through these slides because I've mentioned it. Again, you receive the slide with the results. Now, I want to hear from you. What do you think should be done to encourage SMEs to implement energy efficiency? I need to understand from yourselves, and maybe I'll just discuss over 1 or 2 suggestions, because in order to develop Africa, in order to develop South Africa in the area of sustainable development, we need to work together. Someone is telling me that we need incentives. And I think one challenge that we faced at some point in my country was that there was an emphasis on regulation. So we need to incentivize the audit, because companies always ask, what is in it for me? And I think this is where we need to go. Incentivize and comprehensive financing model. We need banks involved, the Development Bank of South Africa and other banks. The issue of behavioral change. Remember what I was talking about. And remember that Alf, in one of his slides, mentioned the issue of the shop floor workers. And I think he presented to us on the top left of one of his slides, dealing with the people who are actually on the ground. So behavioral change, we have to reach them. Practical skill development for SMEs is also important. Tax benefits, subsidized audits, like what happens here in South Africa. Subsidized audits are very good. In my country, companies have to pay for them. It's only through UNIDO and UN Environment and CTC, and that we had audits that were paid for. So I think it's a challenge. I know we've got colleagues from Ghana, we've got colleagues from Kenya and Uganda. That as Africa, let's also have subsidized audits so that companies don't see energy efficiency as a barrier. Someone says that big companies and government need to participate and partner with SMEs of knowledge sharing and technology advancement. We need ownership at government level, and I think it's one of the things that we are also looking into. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to close this one, and you will see the responses of your colleagues. Now, the lessons learned as we come to a close. Lack of financial resources to support investments, the low perception on energy efficiency is quite well underestimated. Technical capacity, and also the biggest challenge in my country, which we are working on, is the issue of lack of an organized approach, lack of implementation of energy management systems. So a company will respond to an energy bill or a company will respond to a procurement. There's a procurement, there's a tender, they want to see your energy performance, that's where they are responding. So it's more reactive than proactive, and that approach is not sustainable. The issue of a weak business case, short-term financial thinking. Some managers, they think about today, but they don't think about tomorrow. So if we are going to upscale energy efficiency in Africa and in the world, we must think about our benefits in the long term. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I spoke about upscaling, scaling up renewable energy and energy efficiency. So which factors do you consider? Like I said, that this presentation is your presentation. You are going to participate in this presentation, not only myself. And what comes out of here is what guides me, whether I go to the next slide. And my next slide is actually asking whether I should proceed or I should stop. But anyway, which factors do you think are more critical? We are seeing that the issue of awareness is coming out quite very prominently. Also, the issue of training. Yesterday, we had colleagues receiving their certificates here. It's very important for training to happen in recipe assessments. But I also see the aspect of financing coming out very, very strongly from this group, that in order for us to push energy efficiency, we are supposed to make sure that we implement industrial energy efficiency. I've been very generous to you in this presentation because I allowed you to make 3 choices. But in a general election, it's 1 man, 1 vote, 1 woman, 1 vote. But I wanted you to identify the 3 most critical factors, and that is how it comes out. There is a deadlock between awareness and financing in this particular group. So awareness and financing become important. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to talk about scaling up, because I spoke about scaling up without the aid of the machine as we had lost our connectivity. But that's what we are talking about. Pilots will only take us that far. We need to take those pilots into widespread adoption so that we can have a higher impact. We also encourage you and other organizations to adopt energy management systems. The better if it can be also third-party certified. If you are implementing energy management systems without third-party verification, fair enough, but I think it will also help us to make it certified. These are the pictures from the ground, with a team from India auditing one of the fertilizer companies in Zimbabwe during the CTCN-supported project. And so we are very grateful to UNIDO. We are very grateful to UN Environment. We are very grateful to PwC India and other partners who were supporting us in this project. And we want this project to also benefit other countries, to also benefit even the international community. The benefits of energy audits, they are not for today. You already know the benefits of energy audits, and I'm not going to spend time on that. But I will only then move on to the recommendations that capacity building is important. A cluster approach is also important. Like in our case, we used a cluster approach of the association. I know there's also the National Business Initiative here in South Africa and other industry association, the Association of Iron Smelters. You can actually achieve a better impact when you actually implement a cluster approach. Issues of making a requirement for companies to carry out energy audits, promoting benchmarking, incentives, deliberate promotion of certification schemes. Now, the issue of verification is also very important, because some organizations can also greenwash stakeholders, claiming energy savings which actually do not exist. So we want to prevent that. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's been very nice working with you, and I see there are 4 questions. I'm going to just take 2 from the Mentimeter platform. I see that someone asked me on the question of vintage equipment, on how did you manage to change the mindset of the operator, as I assume that they were also on the matured age, and I think Mr. Rapulu yesterday used a more diplomatic word to say matured equipment. Often a limitation to your willingness to change. Thank you very much for that question, which is very, very relevant. One of the key barriers of energy efficiency is the resistance to change, with stakeholders not wanting to move from their old ways of doing things. We managed to convince them we did an inception meeting. It's very important that before you do this energy efficiency project, you do inception meetings, you also do needs assessments to get buy-in from the organizations. I think many development partners, where they fail is that they come and impose projects. So we already got buy-in from the organizations. We also anchored our energy efficiency program on UNIDO's already existing green industry initiative, which has got two branches. On one side, it looks at greening existing industries, and on the other branch, it looks at creation of new green industries. So if I've got, a 50-year-old foundry, I will not be practical if I say that I need to, dismantle it today and install new equipment. That is not going to be practical. I need to do things on a phased approach, and I need to maximize on what I already have. Now, this is my final question, because I'm not going to take all the questions, because the chairman is now looking at me like I've arrived from the moon. I've abused the time that I've been given. But to tell you the truth, 2 minutes is a long time for me to be still standing here. Yes, so the manual is, it looks at the major highlights of the audits. Remember, I spoke about the funnel approach. It can be applied in different industries, but there are some measures which are specific for certain sectors. When we look at issues to do with lighting, these can actually be cross-cutting in various organizations. When we look at compressed air, the compressed air tests, reducing leakages from compressed air, this can actually be, cross-cutting. You also see that the number of elbows and junctions that you have in your compressed air system can also affect efficiency. These are some of the common practices. But you then see that another organization has got a boiler. So measures to do with a boiler may not apply to another organization that does not actually have a boiler. Other companies have got smelters, others are foundries. So to a great extent, most of the recommendations are actually applicable. Right, I've come to the end of my presentation. My apologies, I do not have business cards, so you can take a screenshot of my details, which are over there, and then feel free to contact me. So when I meet you over tea, I'm not able to give you a business card. I apologize for that, but you can take a screenshot of my details. But I want to thank the chairman, I want to thank UNIDO, I want to thank the NCPC of South Africa, and all the stakeholders who are here. As we want to take Africa to the next level, industrial energy efficiency will be at the center of our development. I thank you very much.
Wow. Thanks, Gershwin and Tamanda, for very complimentary presentations and messages. But wasn't that cool? His first page was the second most hits. I've never seen somebody with that interest on the first page for the slide. And then at one stage we had 2 presenters. And Tawanda, you've been tested and you proved your credentials. He delivered it. He knew his work. He knew his subject. And the slide with the most hits is the one that I really am quite intrigued by, because despite what we said yesterday and despite what we said earlier, it appears that we still think cost savings is the biggest driver. 60% of those who voted saw cost savings as the major driver, and 20% saw greenhouse gas or CO2 mitigation. And maybe that is the challenge we have, and that is why we continue to do what we do. So thank you to both of you for really well-aligned presentations. And I think we're at the point now where we're not going to have a third speaker. We had the third speaker from the technical department. So we'll move into questions from the audience. And I will try and limit that to 15 minutes if we have as many questions. And then break a little bit earlier so you could network some more and have some tea earlier. So at this point, I'm going to ask the support staff who are and should be in the audience. And maybe in the absence of them, if you have a question, just raise your hand, introduce yourself, and pose your question. And if you want to direct it at the 3 of us, or any one of us specifically, indicate that, and we will respond as best we can. I can't see. please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
And the question was posed, but in a different way. But I'm gonna try see if I can get you guys. And it's a question for any one of you three. The poll that was taken showed that cost saving is a major drive. But how do you then? What are the things we've seen as a challenge is you get to an organization and they've got no way of recording data. They've, be it whatever system it is, if it's a boiler, they've got a temperature indicator, but it doesn't get recorded or captured in any way, or kilowatt hour data is not available for. So the challenge there now is before implementing any system, you've got to install some sort of a data logout device to capture the data that is, or at least get the people on site to record it manually or any other way. But what we found that getting companies or trying to motivate companies that you will save cost by installing these modern day meters or any sort of thing like that. It's beneficial for the company. So that's a kind of challenge that we've seen when
Yeah.
So can any one of you maybe unpack that and how you found and how you've gotten around such challenges?
Okay, thank you very much for that question.
I think you can go.
We all face a challenge. To start off with, data is important. But it doesn't mean that we need to wait until we have sub-metering in place to do something about it. An understanding, as in your example, of a boiler, a steam system, of thermodynamic fluid flow by applying some of the mass and energy balances. If you know what your water supply is from your municipal line or your borehole into your deaerator or your feed water tank, and if you know what your blowdown is because of the amount of times you open your blowdown valve and stopcock and blow down, then you can do a mass balance around your boiler and determine what the steam is you're producing. Boiler specification, boiler manufacturer specifications require that they have a pressure meter. It's a pressure vessel, so they do need that. That's legal requirement. So you could start doing some things without having very good sub-metering in place. And in energy management systems, we particularly encourage plant engineers and plant personnel to form energy balances with just nameplate information, operating hours, load factors, and those kind of things. And if you have VSDs, the speed of the VSD. And if you got those information, you can start to draw up an indication or compile an indication or a chart of how much energy is consumed by some of the major or significant energy users in your plant. Yes, sub-metering, the price of sub-metering has come down. In the absence of a permanent in-situ meter, you may want to hire one for a short while just to do some spot checks or for some limited logging periods to define whether the information is valuable enough to warrant the expenditure on a meter. Simple mag flow water meters today, you can pick those up for under 1,000 Rand. There's some power loggers that with maybe 0.5% accuracy, you can also buy at a relatively low expense. But it does not mean in the absence of accurate metering that you have to do nothing. You can start to apply your understanding of the fundamentals of any system, and you chose steam, to start developing a picture of what are the major consumers, or how much steam are you producing, at what pressure are you producing it. You can simply listen and time your boiler cycling, your boiler cycles, and determine whether it's short cycling or not, or develop a lot of other troubleshooting options. So in the absence of sub-metering, don't despair. There's a lot of things you can do. But the goal is to ultimately define which parameters you want to meter. You don't have to meter everything that moves. And at the pulp and paper plant, at the quarterly mill meeting, the manager, the national manager said to me that when he asked me about the performance of the energy management system, and I said to him, you did well, but you could have done so much better had you invested in sub-metering. And his response was, well, it was going to cost us tens of millions of Rand to do that. And I said to him, not really so, because you don't have to measure everything. you need to be strategic about how you measure, and you need to interrogate every measurement point in terms of why are you doing it? What are the informational outcomes that flow from that? Don't measure for the sake of measuring. So there's a whole big discussion in that. But to answer your question very simply, no. There's a lot of things you can do. Don't wait for sub-metering before you do it. Thanks. Yes. Yes, Alan.
Sorry, morning to you, Alf, and the panel, and those gathered here this morning. I hope you don't mind if you see this now as a bit of an advert, but I'm Alan from Fishy Tech and Fishy Installations, and what we've done is we've noticed exactly what the gentleman questioned with regard to the cost of getting instrumentation and the implementation of it. So what we are doing as a company to try and give back something to industry for what we've received from the likes of NCPC is we provide a free initial sector audit, for example, on compressed air, on steam, things of that nature, where we can highlight to the management savings that could be initiated by implementing a simple program. And by doing that, we've had a fair amount of success. People are still skeptical because you're giving them something for nothing.
Tell me about
but it can be done.
Well, we're breaking 15 minutes early. I want you guys to network. Okay. Any other questions? Sorry? Please.
Hi to the panel. My question is, through the rollout of the IEE project, I notice a lot of the work that you've done has been specifically orientated towards existing plants and operations. Has some of your work actually gone to the actual suppliers who supply this equipment and tried to change their mindset, specifically in terms of don't just sell a pump with a proper metering system, so that you can start closing the gap between the already existing facilities to those that are now going to start as part of industrial business creation?
Tawanda, I'm going to pass that one to you.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. I think it is very important for us to understand that energy is very, very important in terms of our socio-economic development. And in order to then achieve some of the benefits, we need a multiple stakeholder approach. So when we look at the supply chain, and I think the point you are raising is very important, that the emphasis is mostly on the organization that is implementing. But how do we look at the value chain approach? I'm very glad to say that the ISO 50001 energy management system, latest being of 2018, which Alf earlier on alluded to, and which Gershwin alluded to, and which I also spoke about, actually also looks at procurement. It is now more important than ever for companies to adopt sustainable procurement. If they are manufacturing industries, if they are government departments, what that means is that before you make purchasing decisions, for example, decisions related to appliances or equipment, you can also, even without going to the supplier to do an energy audit at the supplier, you can put energy performance or energy rating as a criteria. Now, the challenge that we see in most developing countries is that most organizations, they look at price alone in making purchasing decisions, which is quite dangerous. So you need to look at price, you need to look at quality, you need to look at operation and maintenance. But now, in order to deal with some of these issues, it's important to then make sure that in your procurement guidelines, in the procurement decisions, you also consider, the energy performance, whether it is a service, whether it is a product. So I hope I have attempted to answer. And Mr. Chairman, I would ask you just for me to answer two questions which were raised on the platform in a minute. There was a question related...
Before you do that,
yes.
Just to complete what Tawanda said, the project at its inception, one of the one of the important things we did, because we realized that in some ways we could be disrupting the status quo, is that we held vendor workshops. So in pumps, we invited all the pump vendors to come and talk to us, so they knew what we were doing, to buy and inform them, first of all, but also to buy the support for what we're doing and to complement the work of the project and their work, so that through our work they could either increase their business, their level of business, but also participate in the project. So that is quite an important element of the project. Tawanda.
Okay, thank you very much. So there are two more questions that I'll take from the platform. There's someone who asked, how can industries get funding from UNIDO? And I think it's a very important question. Gershwin, spoke about it. UNIDO is the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, headquartered in Vienna, Austria. It has got its own constituents. However, UNIDO does not fund projects, and I think Gershwin mentioned that. I think what UNIDO does is to engage, would be development partners, would be partners who could also fund the particular project. So I think if you have got a particular project that needs support, you can talk to the likes of UNIDO, UN Environment, the NCPC here in South Africa to try and find how the project can be supported. I think UNIDO also offers technical assistance in developing, the proposals, but itself, UNIDO does not fund projects. The last question I need to respond to has to do with how do you plan to increase awareness of energy efficiency to parties which aren't present? So there was a question related to how do we, increase awareness to those who are not, present in this particular workshop. I think it is not only to myself or to Gershwin or to Alf. I think it is about all of us who are here. We need to spread the gospel of energy efficiency. And there are three quick wins that we also need to use when we are looking at that. The first thing is we need to continue doing advocacy with the policymakers to make sure that at the national level, energy becomes an agenda at national level that the country is actually aiming for. So if it's taken at that national level, then it is also good. Then I believe that we need to communicate results and success stories. I think you saw Alf and Gershwin, how the South Africa Industrial Energy Efficiency Project was successful. So the findings, and also how the Zimbabwean project was successful. So the findings from those projects is one of the best ways of getting more people involved. When they see what other companies went through who were in also similar circumstances. Then finally, we need to move with the times in terms of communicating sustainability, communicating energy efficiency. The traditional methods of communication, they still work, but we need to speak this language in a way that's exciting. I've been enjoying here the NCPC. If you go outside, you'll see there are quite a number of LCD screens with quite a number of animations. The big screen which is out there, there's an animation, social media, new ways of communicating. We want to reach the youths, different age groups. So we have to actually change our whole communication strategy and also going towards business as unusual.
Okay. What I'd like to wind up with a final question. Thank you, Tawanda. Mr. Gershwin is to answer that second question. How do we fund IEE or projects like the IEE project? Gershwin?
Thanks, Al. So as I think Tawanda said, as the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, we don't hold a pot of money in the background somewhere and go out and fund projects. What we do is, so there is a central budget for UNIDO, which is provided by member states in order to keep operations running, but that's the essential, that fulfills the essential need for that money. What we do is, in collaboration with countries, where countries have specific needs around, in this case, energy efficiency programs, for example, we will look to funders who operate in those countries. And for example, in South Africa, and a number of other countries, the Global Environment Facility does provide an allocation per country every 4 years or so. And if there's an alignment between what the country needs from a climate change mitigation perspective, for example, and that involves an energy efficiency drive, we can design a program in collaboration with that donor, which is the Global Environment Facility in this case, to fund a project like IEE in South Africa. But the Global Environment Facility has a specific mandate, and if we need to move beyond that mandate, we need to find other donors, whether it be the EU, for example, or the Swedish government, for example, who've done some work with our SADC, Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Center in Namibia. These are mechanisms and donors that we try to tap in to get money to execute on the ground in countries.
Thank you very much. And with that, I want to thank you all for participating. Thanks for the time. Thanks for the questions. And especially a great thanks to Tawanda and Gershwin. Thank you very much. Enjoy tea and network. Thank you.